Africa requires significant financing for basic facilities. The continent's infrastructure needs range from 130 to 170 billion US dollars a year, and the infrastructure financing gap is over 100 billion US dollars a year. But which areas are key for development? I spoke to Alain Ebobissé, Chief Executive Officer of Africa 50, a Pan-African investment platform. What areas of development would Africa benefit most from if there was investment in infrastructure?
Well, first of all, the infrastructure itself, it's an investment opportunity in itself because the development of our continent requires a lot of infrastructure. And I see that for investors, investing in infrastructure could provide good returns, but also have a significant impact. Certainly, if you talk about investment in infrastructure in ICT, would enable actually all businesses to benefit from the better broadband access, etc. Electricity, another area where Africa 50, the company that I lead, is focusing on. We need to increase the connection rate of electricity in Africa. We need to have reliable electricity and then reasonably abundant electricity to fuel industrialization, economic growth, etc.
Now, it's an investment opportunity, but private sector investment in infrastructure in Africa is a lot lower than it could be. Why is that?
So I will give you the numbers that we have for private investment in infrastructure in Latin America, which is an emerging region, about $45 billion a year. In Africa, only $8 billion a year on average, less than 20% of what we see in Latin America. And it's a challenge, but I like to focus on the opportunity because I can see that today there are some changes which are actually generating tangible progress in terms of private investment in infrastructure. Recently, Africa 50, my company, was involved in a fairly big investment in infrastructure in Egypt, 1.5 gigawatts of solar power in Egypt. Africa 50 is funding 400 megawatts out of this. These are real tangible investment that we see.
Now, as you say, there is growing interest in investing in infrastructure in Africa, but the funding gap is still very large. What's going to make the biggest dent in that budget?
There are a lot of investors which are out there sitting on the sideline trying to look at good investment opportunity. Look, Africa is probably one of the only continents we can get higher returns on investment than we can see in other regions. We have to take a longer term view. We cannot come to the continent and say we're going to make a quick buck by investing in infrastructure. Africa 50, we are owned by 27 African countries with a sole mandate to help catalyze private investment in infrastructure. We will partner with those investors to try to accelerate the implementation of projects, and we believe that we can deliver good returns and also making a good impact. Government have to set up regulators, independent regulators that are overseeing the sectors. Politicians, frankly, should not be involved in managing the sector. They have to set the policies, and then regulators should be doing that on a day-to-day. There are a number of utilities which are players in the infrastructure space. Government should ensure that those utilities either are concessioned out or privatized, or if they stay in public hands, they have to be efficient. They have to be bankable, they have to have a creditworthiness, which enables them to be good off-takers for those investments that the private sector is willing to do.
What needs to happen within the private sector for infrastructure funding here in Africa to really get off the ground?
First of all, they have to come and look what's happening here on the ground, because sometimes it's perception. They have to come here and see that people actually that have invested here have made money, good money. See, some of the power projects that have been structured with private capital, they've been able to withstand even big shocks, crises, even wars, because people actually want those infrastructure to succeed.
You've mentioned perception. Is that still a big issue that hinders investment?
Frankly, I think perception is still a big issue.
Is it the biggest issue?
It's not the biggest issue because there's still the fact that things are not always good. We have to acknowledge that. Look, one of the first things that we have to do to change is acknowledge that there is an issue. If we say, oh, everything is fine, it's only perception, it's not going to work. Try to focus also on the early stage, the kind of work that you need to do to see things pay off a couple of years down the road.
When it comes to funding infrastructure projects on the continent, you have said governments cannot do it alone. The private sector must come in. But are there any other funding models that are available?
The African Development Bank has estimated that about $170 billion a year of infrastructure needs, investment needs in Africa. So the gap is about $100 billion a year because only $70 billion is being invested today. Government should play a role, the private sector. These developing financial institutions, they have a role to play. But my plea to those institutions, we need to scale up and we need to make sure that we're able to deliver those projects as quickly as possible. Sometimes people want to wait for many years to get a perfect project. But it's better to do something which is good enough but not perfect, to get it done, so that we can see that stuff are happening on this continent.